Sound Speeds. Welcome to the Sound Speeds podcast. It's kind of interesting saying that name again because it's been a few years since I've actually said that name at the intro of a video. But, you know, it's back now and it's here to stay. So let's waste no more time and get right into our first topic. For our first topic, well, have you ever heard the phrase that hell on earth is described as sitting in a quiet room and listening to your grandfather eat a sandwich? Well, if your grandfather's no longer with us, then you probably can't relate because you do anything you could to get a few moments with that grandfather again. But if he is alive and well, then you probably are going to relate to this phrase. And the reason why is because a microphone cannot pick up the difference between signal and noise, hence the phrase signal to noise ratio, why you want to have good signal to a low, very, very low noise. That's ideal. But your ears have the ability to do something called sensory gating, which is basically the ability of your brain to filter out things that are undesirable. And I have a video about it right there if you'd like to check it out. I'm not going to dive into it because you can check out that video, and I will put a link at the end of this video as well. But in short, a microphone is going to pick up all the sounds it hears and detects without any kind of filtration. So you could run VSTs and something like that in post and filter out some or even all of those sounds forensically if you really want to. But the way that this phrase really shines is because you're first of all making the assumption that you're about 3 feet away from someone, which is a typical distance. And real quick, as a side note, if you want to know the reason why, and this is totally unrelated, I'm getting sidetracked already. If you want to know why it was so difficult at the beginning of COVID to understand people, it's because, check out that video right there, what masks actually do to speech. And there's a lot of things in there you might not have thought about before. But the reason why that came to mind now is because our normal distance is approximately 3 feet away when we're talking to someone. And in COVID, it was doubled. So that's the start of the badness. But basically here, if you were sitting about 3 feet away from someone, it doesn't have to be your grandfather, it could be anyone, but usually grandfathers will breathe out their nose and sometimes there's a whistle and sometimes they'll be overly smacky and whatever else. So that's where this phrase comes from, because food is a magnifier for all the kinds of sounds from the mouth that you don't want to hear. All those sounds are just going to drive you crazy when you're sitting there eating something. So I know someone's going to clip that video, that part of the video right there, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, so, but the main point I'm driving home is that food is a magnifier for the kinds of sounds you don't want to hear. And a lot of the times, one of the reasons why we test sounds with B's and P's when it comes down to plosives is because those are very, very aggressive type sounds when they hit microphones. But another thing about B's and P's is that if you get a microphone too close and it starts to pop and crinkle in the mouth, you know, you start to hear the mouth noises. Sometimes those can come across as extremely sharp, where someone isn't just saying something, they're like popping the end of it, or best. It's almost like a pop thing that's just, it's almost like the word itself has razor outlining it. So by the time it goes in your ear, if you ever listen to an audiobook that has presence boosted and is usually recorded with something like a U87, that's not a forgiving microphone, and the microphone is very close to the person's mouth. And I'll tell you, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and sometimes these audiobooks drive me insane, and I can't listen for more than a few minutes because the person who's speaking is extremely distracting. I cannot concentrate on what they're saying because their voice is like razors in my ear. So I have to turn it down, which is one reason why you always hear me say back off on the microphone a little bit, because those really close mouth noises are not going to be as present when you back off on your microphone a little bit. They're just not going to be. The closer your microphone is to your mouth, the more you're going to hear them, which is why I usually say back off. But if you over-articulate your voice and you speak, over-articulating every single sound because you want to make sure that every single syllable is understood, then it is to the point where it becomes almost grating when someone is very close to a microphone that is not forgiving and very, very detailed. I'm not getting close to my microphone because, in all honesty, in post, I don't want to listen to this crap. But mouth noises. If you were to turn on if you were to go into RX, isotope RX, and there is a VST, and I'll put it up on the screen right now, that if you were to output clicks only, and I'll give you a demonstration of what that sounds like normally right now, it is only hearing the mouth pops and clicks from your voice. Plain and simple. It's very, very triggering to some people, but some people might actually like it because they like ASMR. Those are the kind of people that would not necessarily mind a microphone up close where you hear every single magnified sound. Some people are like, yo, yes, get it very close to a microphone. I want to hear it all. But to most people, it can be triggering if ASMR doesn't work on you, which is one reason why I would very much like to recommend that it is one thing to be articulate and to articulate every single word and to make sure that everybody is understanding what you are saying intelligibly. It is quite another to over-articulate every single word, hoping that every single word is overly defined. I almost describe it as like, when you go into into Photoshop and you turn on sharpness and you start to sharpen an image, how there becomes a point when it's not just sharp, it's like got an outline around things and it's like hyper sharp and it's very unrealistic and it just looks terrible. Well, when you do that kind of a thing in audio, it's basically when you are over presence boosting it and it's overly, detailed. And that can happen from giving too much presence in your audio because that's the detail. Basically if your fundamental vocal frequencies, and I have a video talking about it right there, your fundamental vocal frequencies are the lowest frequencies that your voice is basically able to dish out. If you're a male, usually it's between 80 and about 225 hertz. And if you're a female, usually between about 100 and 300 hertz. But then there's first harmonics, second harmonics, third harmonics, and so forth. And when you get all the way up to about 3K, normally that's where the actual output of your voice normally will stop for a human, and harmonics and overtones will take your voice up higher. I believe the highest pitch sound that a sound has ever been recorded from a human voice was a female that was able to achieve 17,000 hertz through harmonics and overtones. The reason I'm mentioning this is because there is a point where you can boost those higher frequencies, which basically a very low very low frequency, like their fundamental vocal frequencies, is basically in alignment with your vocal cords vibrating. So if your vocal cords are vibrating, then it's basically just going, oh, 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 oh. Anything you do with your vocal cords is basically a vibration. And it's the shaping that comes from the lips, the tongue, and basically the mouth in general that provides a little cut point, a little silence point that allows you to differentiate between one word and another. If you don't close your mouth when you speak, you can't really understand what I'm saying very easily because my mouth is not actually shaping it. But to be completely honest, I was doing the exact same thing with my voice that I normally would when I'm speaking. I just was not using my mouth to chop up the sound. If you boost that frequency, the frequency that we hear detail to an extreme, it's grating. That's kind of the idea behind infomercials. When you used to listen to those in the 80s and 90s, you're first of all brain dead at 2 a.m. And by the time you were to sit there flipping around, you came across this channel showing some product in its very best possible light where it's miraculously able to pick up everything, or it's able to get any garbage off your car that you've ever, thought of, and then it provides a nice sheen to it. You're brain dead. You're watching a high energy person demonstrate one thing after another that's just rapid fire and so much stimulus when your brain really can't follow it. And then to make it even more fun, they boost the presence like crazy. And so that way the higher pitch sounds, this is what I call the infomercial effect, personally. But it is very difficult for you to turn away from because those frequencies are also the same frequencies that people dial in on with regards to children in the next room. And so mothers, especially of newborns, will hear and be tuned to that frequency in case their children are crying in the next room. So humans are tuned to that frequency quite well. And then when they boost it in an infomercial, it's overwhelming and it's like sensory overload causing you to not turn away. But because the microphone is not shoved down their throat, you're not hearing an over amount of detail, it's just boosted. So every single thing is a very sharp sound, but not overly detailed where you're hearing all the pops and crinkles from their mouth and the sounds that would drive you crazy. But to pull this back full circle, my main advice to you is when you are doing your recording, pay particular attention to your articulation, but don't overly articulate just for the sake of doing it. Speak very clearly, speak very, very much the way you normally would, and above all else, speak normally. Because people always say, I don't want to sound like a radio broadcaster, but guess what? People usually try to. They're going to say, yes, and welcome to my podcast, because they want to sound like a radio personality. But believe it or not, you are quite valuable the way you are, and your delivery is the way it needs to be. Radio personalities will get way up on the microphone, engage that proximity effect, and they're trying to be high energy because they're trying to keep you entertained so that way you don't flip channels and that way you can hear the advertisements of the station. And a lot of the times their audio quality is extremely high quality and it's transmitted out all over the place, and they want to dial in on your, radio, in your car and allow you to hear it, ideally. But over the years, we have gotten into the habit of recording and trying to duplicate that and emulate that, which is one reason why you have broadcasters say just not like podcasting in general. They're like, yeah, these people will just try to be broadcasters. And the fact of the matter is, the way you normally talk is the way your audience would want to hear you. If you're trying to be something you're not, you're basically trying to deliver something in a way that you normally don't speak. That's going to be vocally straining, and it's not going to sound good for you. Let me ask you this. If I sat here in episode after episode of Sound Speeds, and all I did was speak to you like this, like I really want to drive home a point to you. Sound is very important. And if you were to have your picture and you were to have your sound and you marry the two of them together, it doesn't sound right. It sounds overly energetic, like I'm trying to put on a show. And if I were to say the exact same words, if you have your picture and you have your sound and you're trying to marry the two together, what's easier to listen to? Speak naturally. That's the best form of advice I think I could ever offer you when you were going to be doing your audio recording. Now for our second topic, despite making numerous videos about it, I guess they're getting covered up in the algorithm and they're old videos now on this channel, old in quotes, I kind of have to discuss this again. And this is something that I received 2 emails about this last week from 2 different people. Are things like Fetheads, Dynamite DM1s, Cloudlifters, are those necessary? Well, first of all, I did a video where I tested those against my MixPre 6 and found that with good quality cables, no, they're not. But I'll show you all the different testing, and a lot of people really like that video, so check it out. But what I will tell you is that there is a definite purpose for those devices when you need them. And mainly the reason that you would use them is if you have a very sensitive microphone or a very insensitive microphone, like a dynamic, and your preamps are garbage or they're very low quality. You've heard me say, if you've been watching the channel for a while, for years, that I don't normally recommend audio interfaces unless they have at least 70 dB of gain. Why is this? A lot of interfaces have 58, 60, sometimes 65. What's wrong with those? Those have a very low EIN. And while that is absolutely correct, the reason why is because if you were to measure EIN at a gain level of 60 and you had an identical EIN where the gain is at 70, okay, so you have 2 identical interfaces with an identical EIN, but one of them applies 60 dB of gain and one applies 70 dB of gain, and then you were to turn down the 70 dB of gain to match the 60 dB of gain of the other one, which is going to have the lower noise floor? Plain and simple, it's the one that has 70 dB of gain because you're turning down the preamps. You don't need all that gain. So you're going to be driving down your gain, you're going to be driving down your noise floor. But that's the reason why I don't normally recommend the preamps that have less than 60 or even 60 decibels of gain, because at that point, it's kind of a toss-up as to whether or not a Fethead, Cloudlifter, Dynamite DM1, or any of those, the Clark, any of these devices are going to actually be beneficial. And the reason why is because those devices actually use phantom power to basically essentially create gain. And they do this by increasing the voltage that it receives, the input voltage. It basically increases it as it comes in. So if it is only receiving a little bit, like you're quiet, it's not going to really gain that up very much. Maybe from negative 60 to negative 66 to maybe negative 63 or 60. But if you are speaking very actively, it's going to raise that up much louder. So that way you can actually hear the signal. That's in a nutshell how it basically enhances and creates more gain without increasing the noise floor. You're going to notice the increase of voltage basically output, and that's going to correspond to louder and gain. But one thing to note about this is that it changes the preamp when you add one of these devices. If your preamps are clean and your EIN is low, you add on something like a Fethead, Cloudlifter, Dynamite DM1, something like that, and what you're doing is basically using that device as a preamp instead. So if there's any kind of anomalies or any kind of an issue with the preamp built into those devices, then basically you are going to be passing on that issue, whether the preamps are clean or not, or whether there's any kind of a noise in it, you're going to be passing that on to your recording. And I actually know a professional sound person that puts I'm sorry, not Cloudlifters. They put Fetheads on the input of every one of their recorders on a sound device's recorder. Why? I've even said you shouldn't do that. And he says, well, it means they don't have to apply as much gain. Well, first of all, on a professional recorder, most of the time, your audio is going to be coming in either on a boom, which should be a condenser, or it's going to be coming in from your wireless, which should be outputting out at a line level. So there should be no reason for you to ever have a Cloudlifter installed. If you're running out mic level, why are you going to have a wireless microphone transmit through the air, basically increasing, the voltage and stuff, preamplifying it inside the transmitter? Then it transmits through the air to the receiver, and then basically outputting at a low microphone output level, so that way you just have to boost it again. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. Some people do. Why do you want to amplify something just to attenuate it, to reamplify it? All that's going to do is potentially introduce more noise. So that's bad. So if you have any kind of a microphone inline amplifier, like the Cloudlifter, the Fethead, or the Dynamite DM1, and you want to try to use that on a professional recording, don't. Those professional recorders have a much lower EIN than any device you would ever put on there. And you're going to be changing the preamp to something that basically is about $100, $150. The preamps no longer would be the preamps of your recorder. They would be the preamps of these devices. So the other question that comes up about these devices is, if you do happen to have an interface with lower than 60 decibels of gain, or 60, and you want to put something like a Fethead on your microphone or in line with your microphone, where should you put it? On the microphone end or the mixer interface to recorder end? Well, let me ask you this. First of all, what do those devices do? We've already said they increase the voltage. So they basically increase the output gain somewhere between 22 and maybe 28 decibels, 30 decibels, something like that. Well, if you do that, you can turn your preamps down to maybe only add 20 decibels of gain, maybe up to 28, as opposed to not having them engaged at all. And if your microphone has, for example, 50 decibels, it requires 50 decibels of gain, it's negative 50 sensitivity, and you were to boost it up with 22 decibel increasing device, then you would have to add 28 decibels of gain. Simple math. 50 minus 22 equals 28. But here's the thing I'm going to point out. If you were to output from the microphone, the output level is so low. We're talking, on a dynamic, it could be anywhere from barely over 1.1 millivolt, which would be like what it is on the Shure SM7B. And it could be 3 millivolts, something that's very, very small. And then if you were to pass that low signal through a cable, and then it's amplified at the other end, any anomalies that come through that cable, if you run it over something that is going to introduce any kind of a noise or a buzz, and yes, I understand XLR cables are supposed to resist that, but as you've seen in some of my videos, it doesn't always, depending on the quality of cable you get. So if you are using a less than desirable cable, what should you do? Should you allow it to go out of the microphone down the length of the cable and then amplify? Or should it amplify the voltage to, let's say, 25 millivolts before it actually goes up to the preamplifier? That would be going with a Fethead or something like that directly on the end of the microphone. Plain and simple. It is better for you to amplify the signal before you send it through a cable than it is to send it through the cable and then amplify. Here's an analogy that should work for you. Let's say you have a microphone cable. Okay? You take that cable, you take it out of a microphone, very low input. Let's use the SM7B since I already mentioned it. 1.1 millivolts goes out of that microphone back up to the interface mixer recorder. Let's just say you use the exact same cable, and you now send a signal from your your interface. You go out to something else with that amplified signal. And you run that cable using the exact same XLR cable. You run it over the same kind of noise interference. So let's just say you just unplug it. So unplugging it from your microphone, it's running over something that's going to cause a lot of noise and interference, let's say. And then you would unplug it from the microphone, plug it into a preamplifier as output. So that way your microphone directly inputs into the interface and then it goes out through this cable. Or you then take it from there or from an amplifier that goes to speakers and you run it through the same exact cable to speakers now. One is adding a very low amount of voltage, millivoltage. Another one should be, maybe around plus 4 dB, right? Because it's line level, professional line level. And then another one may be sending something like 500 watts to a speaker. Which one is most likely going to give you the lowest amount of interference on the far end? Well, to answer this question, you normally hear that your XLR cable should be shielded if it's going through a microphone, right? If it's going from a microphone to your mixer interface or recorder, it should be shielded. Same kind of thing would apply if you're going from a mixer interface or recorder to something other, another device, right? But you don't normally hear about speaker cables needing to have shielding. Why? Because it's very high power output. And you're not going to run into a whole lot of interference. Now, it's not to say that you won't. If you run it very carelessly straight down the power line of an amplifier, you can pick up some buzzing and that kind of thing through unshielded cables. But if you run it through shielded cables, you're not going to. And that's because, plain and simple, high power is going to be knocking out any of the little bitty discrepancies that would potentially go into that cable. It's going to be knocking those out. Or rather, those sounds are going to be so low, you're never going to detect them. If a level of the noise, let's say, is here, your microphone level is down here, it's going to definitely send the noise level at this through your line. If your line level is here, those discrepancies are going to be less noticeable. And then way up here is your amplifier signal, and now way down here is those noise anomalies. Should be obvious, right? The more power that goes through the thing, those sounds, if they go through the cable at all, they're going to be less noticeable with the higher amplitudes, the higher outputs. So quality of the cables matter. And I've done a lot of different videos on this topic, and I'll put a lot of links at the end of this video. But plain and simple, you would want to have a Fethead, Cloudlifter, whatever the inline amplifier is on the microphone end if you want to be very best possible scenario. You may say it's ugly on the end of the microphone. Yeah, but you know what the solution is? Get yourself a better interface. So there you have it, another episode of the Sound Speeds podcast, now officially by name. And there's going to be another announcement I'm going to add in the next video, the next Sound Speeds podcast, and it's going to be really cool. I'm already excited about it, but it's going to take a little bit more time to get in gear. But regardless, I would like you to check out those videos, and I will put, there's going to be links to various different videos at the end of this video, and they should be popping up on the screen of it as we speak, because I would like you to check them out. So thank you for watching this episode, and I will see you in another one with even more wonderful bits of sound advice. How's that for an outro? Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.